Okay, so good morning and welcome to the chapter of the day, which today is Acts 27. I tried adding a little light to the set and it's not doing what I wanted to do. So there's where we'll stop. Welcome to the morning of spearmint tea. And in Acts 27, we have quite a spectacular story. Last night I watched a documentary about Niagara Falls. And in the documentary, they panned back through the Great Lakes and mentioned at one point that there are something like 6,000 shipwrecks at the bottom of the Great Lakes. And then they showed film of a lot of them. The Mediterranean Sea, where Acts 27 takes place, is much like that. It is a very tumultuous sea, and there are shipwrecks all over the bottom of that sea, and of course, a lot of them are along the coastlines because that's how they traveled in those days. There was a movie made, The Poseidon Adventure, about that very area, and a storm that took a ship down. Well, that's what's happening in Acts 27. It really is a action-packed feature, and it also has a lot of information about Paul, how he was treated on the positive side, how his friends were helpful, and how more than one time somebody thought they might have a better plan, and how that turned out. So I thought that today we could read this chapter. It only has 44 verses, so we'll read with just a few comments, with the starting comment being pay attention as you read to everybody who's in the story, as Luke often does, but also the words that Paul speaks in different situations. This journey in Acts 27 took several months before the ship went down and they all reached shore safely. So here we go, Acts 27. And when it was decided that we should sail to Italy, they delivered Paul and some other prisoners to one named Julius, a centurion of the Augustan regiment. So, entering a ship of Adramyttium, we put out to sea, meaning to sail along the coast of Asia. Aristarchus, a Macedonian of Thessalonica, was with us. And the next day we landed at Sidon, so they're still on the coastline of Lebanon, that area. And Julius treated Paul kindly and gave him liberty to go to his friends and receive care. So pay attention to Julius. And when we had put to sea from there, we sailed under the shelter of Cyprus because the winds were contrary. And when we had sailed over the sea which is off Cilicia and Pamphylia, that's under the coastline of Turkey, we came to Myra, a city of Lycia. There the centurion found an Alexandrian ship sailing to Italy, and he put us on board. So they're now on another ship. When we had sailed slowly many days and arrived with difficulty off Cnidus, the wind not permitting us to proceed, we sailed under the shelter of Crete off Salmone. Passing it with difficulty, we came to a place called Fair Havens, near the city of Lasea. Now when much time had been spent and sailing was now dangerous because the fast was already, Paul advised them, the fast being one of the Jewish feasts in Jerusalem had now ended. So that gives us a dating. This is sometime in the year 59. It's almost certain, if we can say that. So Paul says, Men, I perceive that this voyage will end with disaster and much loss, not only of the cargo and ship, but also our lives. In other words, if we continue from here, who knows? Nevertheless, the centurion was more persuaded by the helmsman and the owner of the ship than by the things spoken by Paul. And because the harbor was not suitable to winter in, the majority advised to set sail from there also, if by any means we could reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete, opening toward the southwest and northwest, and winter there. When the south wind blew softly, supposing that they had obtained their desire, putting out to sea, they sailed close by Crete. But not long after, a tempestuous headwind arose, called Euroclydon. So when the ship was caught and could not head into the wind, we let her drive. And running under the shelter of an island called Clauda, we secured the skiff with difficulty. When they had taken it on board, they used cables to undergird the ship. So they actually kind of wrapped the ship up with cables to keep it from breaking up. And fearing lest they should run aground on the Syrtis sands, they struck sail and so were driven. And because we were exceedingly tempest-tossed, the next day they lightened the ship. On the third day we threw the ship's tackle overboard with our own hands. Now when neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small tempest beat on us, all hope that we would be saved was finally given up. But after a long abstinence from food, and Paul stood in the midst of them and said, Men, you should have listened to me and not have sailed from Crete and incurred this disaster and loss. And now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For there stood by me this night an angel of the God whom I belong and whom I serve, saying, Do not be afraid, Paul, you must be brought before Caesar. And indeed God has granted you all those who sail with you. Very interesting comments from Paul as he got a message from God. The God of the Mediterranean, the invented God, was Poseidon. And of course, he's just a figment of their imagination. The real God has given a message, and they're all going to be saved. It's going to be a disaster in many ways, but they are going to be saved. So, therefore take heart, men, for I believe God that it will be just as it was told me. However, we must run aground on a certain island. Now when the 14th night had come, as we were driven up and down the Adriatic Sea, so that puts them much closer to Italy, the boot of Italy now, about midnight the sailors sensed that we were drawing near some land. And they took soundings, and found it to be 20 fathoms. And when they had gone a little farther, they took soundings again, and found it to be 15 fathoms. Then, fearing lest we should run aground on the rocks, they dropped 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for day to come. And as the sailors were seeking to escape from the ship, when they had let down the skiff into the sea under pretense of putting out anchors from the prow, Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, Unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved. Then the soldiers cut away the ropes of the skiff and let it fall off. And as day was about to dawn, Paul implored them all to take food. See, they haven't eaten for 14 days. So he says, Today is the 14th day you have waited and continued without food and eaten nothing. Therefore I urge you to take nourishment, for this is for your survival, since not a hair will fall from the head of any of you. And when he had said these things, he took bread and gave thanks to God in the presence of them all. And when he had broken it, he began to eat. That is a powerful statement of Paul's confidence and faith and hope in God that is directed toward any believers who were there, and certainly toward all unbelievers, to learn something about God. You can learn about God in virtually every experience of every day, if you just look around. So 36 says, "Then they were all encouraged and also took food themselves. And in all we were 276 persons on the ship. So when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship and threw out the wheat into the sea. When it was day, they did not recognize the land, but they observed a bay with a beach onto which they planned to run the ship if possible. And they let go the anchors and left them in the sea, meanwhile loosing the rudder ropes, and they hoisted the mainsail to the wind and made for shore. But striking a place where two seas met, they ran the ship aground, and the prow stuck fast and remained immovable, but the stern was being broken up by the violence of the waves." So one end of the ship is steadfast, and the waves are breaking the other end of the ship up. And the soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners. So in spite of all the evidence from Paul, the prayers, the answer to their fasting, and the hope, they're still planning murder, lest any of them should swim away and escape. But the centurion, wanting to save Paul, kept them from their purpose, and commanded them that those who could swim, should jump overboard first and get to land, and the rest, some on boards and some on parts of the ship, and so it was that they all escaped safely to land. This isn't really the end of the story. There's kind of like a sequel in chapter 28. But think about what you can learn from the various people and events, the storms of life, the shipwreck that happens, and yet the confidence that God will bring us through. In this case, they were all brought through alive. Sometimes people aren't all brought through alive, but if they hold on to hope and faith, they're brought through anyway to the paradise of God. So Acts 27 has quite a little bit of information to get us into the trip to Rome in 28. And remember, in Romans 1, which Paul had written a few years earlier, he said to the Romans to pray that he would have a prosperous journey. Think about that, from the middle of Acts 21 to where we are now, just escaping to shore and still being wet from the shipwreck. And is that prosperous? Thank you for reading Acts 27. And we'll hope to see us again tomorrow and finish this particular letter. Bye.